2022, a new year of the 21st century has come at last, and it's finally a year older than the drinking age. It actually feels so refreshing to make a best of the year list again. While I have seen some great films back in 2020, I didn't really have the drive to seek out as so many back then as I do now. With how devastating and tumultuous that year was for a bevy of reasons, I just didn't have the energy to be as adventurous. I believed when people said that films like Sound of Metal and Nomadland were some of the best films of that year, but even with some of these films that I could have easily streamed, I just didn't care to watch them. Burnout was real. Now that 2021 has given a lot of people like myself some more breathing room, I feel much hungrier for films I otherwise would have overlooked. I've seen so many great films, from the prestigious to the laugh so hard I couldn't breathe type stuff, that I don't think cutting my list off at 10 would do this justice. So this is going to be a top 15 list of films that stood out to me the most. Just a disclaimer that I'm neither a film critic nor a full-time YouTuber, so with any best of the year or any other list video of this kin, I haven't seen every single film that came out this year. Because of that, films like Licorice Pizza, Drive My Car, or even Belfast are unfortunately gonna get the shaft. I will eventually get to see some of these films, but by the time I can watch them, the best of 21 lists will pretty much be about as relevant as what was trending on Twitter last week. While you're here, give this video a like, leave a comment down below of some of your favorite films of 21, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you'll know when I post my latest videos. While you look out for some of those videos coming soon, you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at FilmGeekDave, as well as my letterbox for all the films I watch in my free time. For now though, let's get started. Don't Look Up. Now, as long as Will Ferrell doesn't team up with John C. Reilly, I actually do enjoy me a good Adam McKay written and or directed comedy. His more serious films, however, I do see as hit and miss. While the misconceived structure of The Big Short led me to respect the film more than like it, I thought that Vice was on the whole a fairly decent film. With Don't Look Up, however, this is easily my favorite in his post-Anchorman 2 career. As for the polarizing discussion of whether Don't Look Up is preachy or prevalent, I'm much more inclined in the latter for this reason. McKay's quick direction, biting writing, and the excellent lead performances from Leonardo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence help inject plenty of urgency in this climate change allegory, making for a strongly centralized emotional focus. This also extends to the rest of the supporting cast like Meryl Streep and Jonah Hill's delightful idiocy, as well as the maniacally creepy turn for Mark Rylance as the tech billionaire who pulls off the strings of destroying the comet or lack thereof. Rather than looking for new converts, Don't Look Up shows more interest in the frustration of getting a message out about the end of the world, whether they're either distracted with trends, want to use it for any gain, or they just don't care. This is where both the comedy and the pathos make this story work, making fun of the dysfunction, but also allowing time for conveying the desperation these central characters are all going through. All of this sells in its final scene that, without giving away, powerfully asks the question of what would you do on your last moments of Earth. As for myself, does its appeal to the emotions make Don't Look Up more so polished propaganda than solid rhetoric? It does, but the film's form as a narrative over a documentary makes it feel more entertaining. Sure, we all love to laugh at how f***ed up the world is, but it's not afraid to draw sympathy from the hopelessness of its situation. Besides all that, I'm so glad that a mainstream film can bust the doors open for even greater discussions about our role in the escalating issues of climate change. Now on to the next spot before I get an existential crisis over this burning planet. Val. I have to admit that I'm not the biggest fan of Val Kilmer, but I was curious in this film after hearing about how good it was. After watching it, I can safely say that I have a newfound appreciation for Kilmer as both an actor and as a human being. Written and shot by Kilmer himself, the film is narrated by his younger brother Jack and depicts the former's life, starting with a love of making movies, life as a theater kid, to coping with life after a battle with throat cancer. If this film were written by anybody else, then this would have been a solid documentary, but because because of the fact that this doc on Kilmer is written by himself, Val becomes an even more impressive documentary for its sheer vulnerability and honesty. One of the moments that stuck out to me the most was when he talked about his time acting for big Hollywood movies like Top Gun and Batman Forever. Hearing him talk about how passionate he is about the art of acting but having to sacrifice that for profit will strike a chord with anybody, including myself, with a passion for any kind of art regardless of the demanding balance between art and money. The home video footage of him, such as making movies with his brother, doing theater, and the like, also do a lovely service of humanizing a larger-than-life figure. Val reminds that celebrities, particularly actors, are still people with their own lives and struggles, no matter how sufferable they come across. Sure, there are those of immense privilege of wealth that do need to be brought down to earth, but people like Val Kilmer show that being alive means just as much as what he can contribute. If documentaries are supposed to teach us something new or leave something behind to think about, then Val did just the trick for me. What could have been a vanity project turns out to instead be a love letter to creativity, family, self-love, and life. Tick, tick, boom. Andrew Garfield leading a musical is an interesting prospect alone. I mean, it can't be as bad as... And I'm Javert. That. But Lin-Manuel Miranda's directorial debut makes this doubly exciting to watch. As my introduction to Jonathan Larson, Miranda did such a great job with adapting a Broadway musical that jumps back and forth from how Larson narrates a story from his workshop to what actually happened leading up to this moment. Much of the joyous spark of Tick Tick Boom is in Miranda's direction. Whether the film has people talking or singing, it exactly knows when to stop for drama or to pick up the pace when the stakes rise. Speaking of singing, the musical numbers were keenly directed. All the songs perfectly capture the mood of the scene and actors, while also moving along the story without myself catching on. No More and Therapy are hilarious earworms, Bobo's song and 3090 are delightfully energized, and Johnny Can't Decide and Why also add plenty of potent drama that balances the weight of the story. The film on the surface does look like a traditional success story with the dreamer thinking big, but there's this pressure to just settle down and get a job. What I really love about Tick Tick Boom is that unlike most films of the kin, this one humanizes all the major characters moving on from him to the point that the idea of settling down now feels like this looming and omnipresent threat. There really is no central villain to oversimplify the story. What we have instead are a group of people figuring out their futures and confronting the possible fractures and unions of platonic or romantic relationships. The song Therapy especially isn't afraid to not spell out whether or not Larson is acting dickish about his romantic relationship. I laughed while also feeling forlorn about their split. That's what makes Tick Tick Boom such a great modern musical biopic. A great degree of sincerity makes this film about a high-stakes success story of the rise to stardom feel naturally personal. All the more reason why having the titular musical serve as the end product of Larson's journey feels poetic without feeling schmaltzy. Garfield, Miranda, and everyone are all excellent. A new musical actor and film director are born, and I eagerly await for what they have in store next. ENCANTO. ENCANTO, more so than Frozen, Zootopia, and even Moana, encapsulates what makes the revival era of Disney animation so special. With each film, I felt like that Disney got progressively deeper and more complex with the stories they're telling. Instead of scapegoating all the conflicts on a villain, Gaston will always have a place in my heart, having the source of all problems lie within inner conflicts such as family, expectations, and vulnerability really show that ENCANTO has so much more on its mind than a single baddie ruining everything. Everything great that everyone said about ENCANTO couldn't be truer. The protagonist and Mabel, especially the supporting cast, are all phenomenally realized. They all not only play off each other perfectly and feel totally relatable, but they all feel totally distinct in both powers and inner conflict. Like the aunt who can control weather but she has to constantly be happy or else her storm will destroy the house. There's even Louisa who's incredibly strong and powerful but dreads over her failure. I could go on and on about these supporting characters, but the messages feel so well realized. We're more than our gifts. In fact, we can still be special without them, and how families can overcome intergenerational trauma. I heard that Disney Plus is adapting this into a TV show, and that couldn't have been a more perfect idea. ENCANTO has such a rich cast of characters and pulled off such ingenious world building that not making some kind of spin-off of this film feels like wasted potential. The songs, of course, from Lin-Manuel Miranda are obviously fantastic for doing what musical numbers should do, briskly moving moving along the plot while also serving plenty of insight within the character's psyche, like Surface Pressure, What Else Can I Do, and that other song that'll be your latest earworm for the next few months. I talk about it, but as the song says, we're not going to talk about it. ENCANTO is so good that it makes me beyond excited for what Disney could do next. If they're thematically pushing themselves this much with such spectacular results, then I have a feeling that Disney's revival era is going to be responsible for some of the best animated work that the studio has offered since the Renaissance era, if not going all the way back to their golden age. Spider-Man: No Way Home. Being the third in the third series of Spider-Man films, I was actually quite cautious going in. With multiple villains, the multiverse, fan service, a couple botched sequels, to one hell of a cliffhanger thanks to Far From Home, I didn't rule out that this could have been a disappointment besides this year's MCU disappointment. This is all the more reason why No Way Home works so well. This is a big Spider-Man film. It significantly has more moving parts, but all of them fit and enhance the core story of what's going on with Peter Parker. Not to mention, it preserves the humor and charm of its high school setting, with him going through college applications, dealing with MJ and his BFF Ned, and perfectly balancing the responsibilities of the roles of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. So since this is the third part in the third series, you might say that this latest Tom Holland Spider-Man film is 3 for 3. I always felt there was a recurring formula with the MCU trilogies with Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America in how they sacrifice a big part of their identity in order to become a more singularly complete hero. With No Way Home, having Peter Parker achieve full power and responsibility over his role as Spider-Man made for a hilarious, exciting, and surprisingly moving entry in the MCU's take on the series. I'd go so far as to call it the best Spider-Man film besides Into the Spider-Verse. Even though both of those films deal with some semblance of the multiverse, even down to sharing a lot of the same themes, what distinguishes No Way Home from Into the Spider-Verse was that it challenges Spider-Man to overcome the villains with compassion rather than only fighting. Most of the biggest action sequences take place in the beginning and end, with some sprinkled every now and then in the middle, but it's just Peter Parker with his friends figuring out how to fix these villains. What's clever about this conflict is the inclusion of Green Goblin. Willem Dafoe was always fun as that villain, but he's beyond nefarious and disgustingly good in No Way Home. His presence creates tension during the quieter moments, and his rise as the central villain of the film perfectly cranks up the emotional stakes to 10. No Way Home still earns its dramatic highlights because instead of having Peter regret the compassion he bestows onto the villains, he still owns his choices and understands that now is the time to fight. No Way Home naturally benefits from several moments of fan service, except for this one meme of a scene.
You know, I'm something of a scientist myself.
Ugh. They knew what they were doing, and it's kind of fucking cringe. I almost half expected Dafoe to wink to the camera when he said that. As for the elephant in the room, more like two of them, the inclusions of Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire felt so cathartic yet naturally fleshed out. This is far more than fan service. Both of these characters perfectly depict the consequences of the choices that Spider-Man could live with and make. No matter the choice, they have to make sacrifices, and seeing Tom Holland's Spidey learning to cope with them and then find the strength after such a devastating loss felt so moving that it cements Holland as my personal favorite Spider-Man. All of the more reason why the ending delivers on such a powerful finality that I actually wanted the sequel immediately. See it if you haven't already. The Tragedy of Macbeth. I remember when I read the script in my senior year of high school, and I recall that out of Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, and A Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth was my favorite William Shakespeare script at the time. Aside from Akira Kurosawa's Throne of Blood, this is the Shakespeare adaptation of Macbeth that reminded me why this play is the powerful tragedy that it is. It's about how murder becomes a corrosive plague on the human spirit through the hands of sin and guilt. What writer-director Joel Coen achieves in his first film without his brother Ethan is a magnificently spellbinding film that both feels like classic Shakespearean cinema, but a distinctly Coen-esque film nonetheless. I love Denzel Washington and Frances McDormand, but I initially thought that having American actors with their native accents would distract from the language too much. Does anybody remember Baz Luhrmann's take on Romeo and Juliet with Leonardo DiCaprio?
On that hit, you miss. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, nor by the encounter of assailing eyes, nor ope her lap to saints seducing gold.
Yeah, I don't want to either. Sorry, Leo, but we all gotta start somewhere. It, however, didn't take too long to forget these are actors, and for myself to get lost into the psychological turmoil of these characters. Washington makes for a naturally conflicted lead, and McDormand especially makes for a fantastic Lady Macbeth. Ambitious and nefarious in her highs, but also sympathetic yet terrifying in her lows. There are also standouts from the supporting cast that really stood out for the better, like Brendan Gleeson as King Duncan, Harry Melling as Malcolm, but the best of the supporting cast has to go to Catherine Hunter as the Three Witches. Oh my lord, I don't think I'll ever see a better witch or witches better than her in any other Macbeth adaptation. The way her voice crackles, the movements she shifts, and the stiffness she casts constantly made me uncomfortable whenever she was on screen. Even the way that she's one witch but the other two stand by her when reflected in water only adds so much more to the otherworldly spirit of the film. Every time she comes on screen, I always feel like I'm going insane when I'm not going insane over how good this film looks. Speaking of which, making the film in black and white really makes this feel like an effective mix between an Ingmar Bergman film and something straight out of the German Expressionist era like Nosferatu or M. I'm actually glad that Cohen veers away from a more realistic depiction of the play, as the black and white aesthetic really captures the fracture between denial versus truth and reality versus insanity. The sharp and blurred contrast between light and shadow constantly blow my mind, and they even make the scenery feel like they belong in another world. I mean, look at it! I can pretty much turn the audio off on some of these scenes and you can still feel what's going on with the characters. The way that the ground cross-dissolves to the sky to the point where they feel indistinguishable only adds to the nightmarish landscape of the film, though I will admit, I haven't decided whether the 4:3 aspect ratio works for me or not. It's not bad, and it certainly doesn't detract from the film, but I wonder if displaying it on full screen or letterbox would make little to no difference. What Cohen nonetheless makes up for in narrative innovation in this take of the tragedy of Macbeth is the sheer style of the film. It doesn't even feel like scenes were cut out, yet it still feels like a complete story, and as someone who believes that style is indeed substance, then it's the look of the film that definitely carries the tragedy of Macbeth from beginning to end. It stylizes the dramatic tension of the story to the point where it actually enhances it. If you're into Shakespeare like myself, looking for a good take on Macbeth, or even an introduction to such, you certainly can't go wrong with this. The Lost Daughter. This was the only film on my list that I didn't actively have on my radar, but it really is an excellent drama, as well as an exciting debut from writer-director Maggie Gyllenhaal. I love how quietly and patiently this film moves. There are sequences where the main character gazes at the beach and the onlookers, and it's thanks to meticulous editing that does a better job of telling the story better than dialogue could. Even when there is dialogue, it sounds so introspective and natural. The performances were especially marvelous on so many levels. Olivia Colman typically shines with balancing vulnerability and depth, even to where her friendliness seems tainted with melancholy. And Jessie Buckley also shines as the younger version of Colman's character, but also feels like her own character so that it doesn't feel like ventriloquism. To be honest, I'm beyond shocked that Dakota Johnson was in this film because she was that damn good. Just to give the idea of what kind of film watcher I am, I'm one of the first people to point out who's familiar in the film, mostly because I know who's in it ahead of time. It really does take amazing skill to get lost in a role, and I honestly didn't realize Johnson was in it until the last third. It just goes to show you that with certain performers, it's almost never the actor's fault for a bad performance in shitty smut films. Its nonlinear structure feels carefully constructed to where it feels guided by the emotional state of Coleman's character rather than a showy attempt at intricacy. All the transitions from present day to past day feel so consistent to what emotions are being conveyed, and the transitions to other states of mind also feel so fluid. This is massive credit to the editing that makes the pacing of this film feel so unpretentiously elaborate, yet smoothly paced when it's not so obvious. Given the fact that The Lost Daughter is about a mother navigating her emotional days, I couldn't imagine this film being told in any other way other than a non-linear structure. If you think that The Lost Daughter might not be the kind of film you'd enjoy, take a chance and give it a watch. I initially thought so too, but it's now number 9 on this list. Chances are you might find a truly special gem in the rough. The Mitchells vs. the Machines. Yeah, remember all that I had said about ENCANTO? Well, ENCANTO. The Mitchells versus the Machines, man! With Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Sony Animation's style perfectly balances the looks of 2D and 3D animation. The character designs feel so simple, yet alive and vibrant in 2D, but the 3D animation grants so much space and depth without sacrificing the endearing nature of the former or feeling too showy. Did I mention how funny this film was? Well, it's without a question one of the funniest films I've seen in 2021. It feels a lot like an Edgar Wright film in that the jokes move so fast and are so abundant that it paces out the film fast and energized, but never rushed. I've seen this film twice and I barely laugh by the barrelful every time I watch it. The family in this film is so likable and completely relatable. Katie's such an infectious cinephile that she wears her passion on her sleeve. Her little brother Aaron, who's so innocent and sweet with his obsession with dinosaurs. On a side note, I'm just gonna say that based on his obsession and lack of social cues, that he having autism is my headcanon, and these two are just me wrapped into one, so in case we ever meet, you're welcome. You've got the rational mother keeping the family together, and you've got the father who enjoys more of the simple things like nature. These are all unique, hilarious, and endearing characters without becoming cynical or obnoxious caricatures. I also love how the villain of the film who leads this robot revolution is just an AI who's constantly treated as a throwaway product. She's just this face on an iPhone that looks like it was drawn by an Etch-a-Sketch, and supplying them with the voice of Olivia Colman, making them sound like a petulant teenager, makes this all the funnier. On a side note, can we get a millennial remake of The Favorite? Just saying. Thank you. The tech guru, who's partially responsible for the robot revolution, is also voiced by the always funny Eric Andre. A rich celebrity engaging in technological disaster? Does that sound familiar? No? Well, I digress. This still makes for such a clever, funny, and touching commentary on how we use technology to express how we really feel, accumulating into a message of accepting it as an extension of our personalities rather than as a distraction of such, giving us a better understanding of who we are as people. It's kind of like how things were better back in the old days when everyone had a newspaper to read. Never mind. Speaking of family films dealing with more complex ideas, I love how The Mitchells vs. the Machines doesn't even think about the boomer versus millennial side of technology. What replaces the kids these days and okay boomer kinds of cliches is how it more so focuses on tech's role in the family. Katie uses it to express who she really is, her brother and mother use it to bring people together, and her dad just doesn't really care for it all that much. This is such the case that it's almost as if they're speaking another language. In The Mitchells vs. the Machines, what could have been so easy to pick a side, the film instead has a compassionate understanding between these two, being yourself while still remembering your roots. Also, as a lesson for Disney, you can indeed represent not just a gay character, but any queer one without making them a shallow caricature. It's not that hard. Just right! The Mitchells vs. the Machines is without a doubt the best animated film I've seen in 2021 because it's the funniest, smartest, the most touching, and it has the most compelling statement to say about family out of all of them. DUNE. Don't let that little number next to this film fool you. Out of all the films on this list, DUNE is the one I cherish the most. It's not Denis Villeneuve's best film, it's not his best sci-fi film, and it's not even the best film of the year. But this was the film responsible for single-handedly bringing me back into the movie theater. For the entirety of its beefy 2.5-hour runtime, I sat there with eyes all glazed, mouth fallen to the floor, and so still like a statue that I actually forgot I was wearing my surgical mask throughout the whole film. DUNE was the purest of cinematic hypnosis on this side of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Yeah, it's that good. I've heard the lore gets dense from the novels, but because Villeneuve is adapting this into a visual medium like film, it perfectly benefits from visual storytelling when it doesn't world build. It's dense, rich, and complex, but never overstuffed and exhausting. They knew when to expand the world while also realizing an endlessly captivating central story of Paul Atreides coming into his own. Game of Thrones in outer space couldn't have been a more apt and compelling comparison. Every performance in DUNE is magnificent, from Timothée Chalamet, Oscar Isaac, to Jason Momoa, to Dave Bautista. Holy crap, this especially surprised the hell out of me for how physical these two got. The sequences that individually involve these two are amazeballs. Even without having read a single word out of Frank Herbert's legendary novels, I feel like I've been exposed to a rich and sweeping lore. I finally understood why and how it paved the way to Alejandro Jodorowsky's lost masterpiece, which which in turn inspired Star Wars and Alien. Even with the current sci-fi zeitgeist dominated by the revival of Star Wars, Dune stands in a totally different class on its own. The choice to film Dune in the sandy deserts of Europe and the Middle East, evoking Lawrence of Arabia, makes this world so much more mythical and magical than any other American desert, soundstage, or even green screen can convey. There's something truly surreal and captivating about seeing Atreides interacting with sand and seeing the glittering fall through his fingers. That's only something you can get in the actual desert, not on a computer.
I don't like sand.
Shut the f up, Anakin. Sand is gorgeous, and I want it all over me. I'm totally convinced that this is not only the best score that Hans Zimmer has ever produced by a country mile, but maybe the best film score I've heard in years. Besides being completely euphoric to the senses, it sounds unlike any other score out there. It's almost as if Zimmer has actually visited the world of Dune and re-recorded the music that he heard from there. I've been listening to this soundtrack, or in this case soundtracks, ever since I saw the film, and it gives me goosebumps every single time I give them a listen. I will say that I do have a beef with one specific criticism with Dune, that being that it feels too much like one half of a film because the ending feels anticlimactic. While I find that understandable, I find that the reasoning behind this just doesn't make any sense. Everyone compares this to Fellowship of the Ring or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone as being better introductions to their worlds. Upon thinking about this even more, I actually find those comparisons wildly unfair. While those films are adapted from single novels, they also tell the whole story of those novels. Dune, however, adapts half a story, or in this case, half a novel. If anything, this adaptation of Dune should invite more reasonable comparisons to other films that adapt at least one half of a novel. In this case, Villeneuve's Dune does a way better job than the Part 1s of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, the Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn, the Hunger Games Mockingjay, and certainly the entirety of Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy. It's a low bar, but Dune made a freaking Superman leap over it like nobody's business. Now, as far as how good Dune Part 2 will be, the jury is still out, but if it's as good as Villeneuve claims it's gonna be, this is a glorious build-up to what could be a landmark in both sci-fi and epic filmmaking. Somebody cryogenically freeze me until Part 2 comes out. Spencer. What looked like one of those films that would be a terrific performance within a film that's just kinda turns out to be one where mesmerizing filmmaking matches an Oscar-worthy performance by Kristen Stewart as Princess Diana. Wait. Academy Award nominee Kristen Stewart. Let me just pause. Sorry, but Academy Award nominee Kristen Stewart are 5 words I've always wanted to say. Moving on, director Pablo Larraín, who made the superb Jackie, fully fleshes out all those sensibilities from that film to Spencer in creating a wholly immersive mindset. The foggy landscape of Norfolk, shot on a combination of 16 and 35mm negatives, exudes this dreamlike realm that complements the suffocating illusion of royalty upon Diana. As I previously mentioned about Val, it's incredibly easy to say that celebrities have it easy because of how affluent they are, but Spencer is another film that argues that the feel-good facade that they push always has a dark side, constantly monitoring what to eat, sticking to a rigid fashion statement, and being forced to conserve her body damages Diana's mental health to the point of her fantasizing about self-harm and even suicide. There's an especially startling scene where Diana destroys her pearl necklace and proceeds to eat the pearls within her soup, which is easily the best scene in the film. If the haunting editing and score weren't enough to choke me with anxiety, it's Stewart's heartbreaking restraint, just barely hanging on before an explosion of trauma and misery. I, as well as the other preceding fantasies, instantly forget that they're not real, because the film already feels like a melancholy illusion that these imagined acts of self-harm feel like Diana desperately clawing out into reality. The big problem is that this is the reality wherein she's trapped. Oscar-nominated performances have practically become a cliche, from burying themselves into pounds of makeup and prosthetics, recreating real people into biographical roles, to big bombastic moments of crying or yelling that'll inevitably appear on the award show montages. While there's an exception to every rule, Stewart's turn as Diana is one of those rare performances that exercises restraint and subtlety that feel emotionally sublime, not showy. I'm also glad that it sticks to its identity as a fable of a true tragedy by leaving the most tragic chapter in Diana's life out of Spencer. It would have been so easy to slap walls of text against a black screen that exposit the rest of her life after the film's conclusion, but because her demise is implied, it makes the ending of Respite even more of a tragic end. Now that the film is available to stream on Hulu after a disappointing run, I highly recommend Spencer. This is far more than a prestige biopic with an Oscar-nominated performance. It's a sympathetic, haunting, and introspective cautionary tale on royalty, depression, and nostalgia. The Last Duel. I initially thought Matt Damon and Ben Affleck seemed jarring in an epic period piece set in medieval France. Not only did they prove to be fantastic in their respective roles, alongside menacing and award-worthy turns for Adam Driver and Jodie Comer respectively, but The Last Duel delivered on a narrative just as labyrinthine and intricate as its treatment of timely themes. The film tells its Me Too-inspired story in the vein of Kurosawa's Rashomon, in a non-linear structure where we see the same series of events told by three different people, all played by Damon, Driver, and Comer in that order. What makes The Last Duel's approach to narrative compelling and powerful instead of pretentious and hackneyed is how director Ridley Scott puts us in both the vulnerable and uncomfortable shoes of the victim and the accuser respectively. It's both a psychologically haunting and harrowing experience. In realizing a medieval France, Scott evokes a sense of awesome fear and darkly epic grandeur in beautiful castles and open landscapes. Was this all shot on location, green screen with computers, or a mix of both? I was so compelled with this labyrinthine juggling act for the whole 2.5 hours that I never bothered to care, which, spoiler alert, there was no green screen. Good job, Scotty. I just accepted this canvas as a fully fleshed out extension of the unfolding drama. Driver especially turns in a career-best performance in creating a perfect balance in depicting someone who can easily be seen as a hero to people, but also capturing the predatory and primal urge of a chauvinist. Cause that scene, you know what I'm talking about, I was squirming in my seat so hard that I actually almost fell out of it. If it wasn't for Kristen Stewart, Comer was the best performance by an actress that I saw that year. All of this ends with what I consider to be the most action-packed climax of 2021. Spidey, I love ya. There may be 3 of you, but you don't have 2 chauvinistic holes beating the shit out of each other. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules here. When these 2 messy and deeply flawed characters finally have their battle, it reaches the ultimate height of both psychological and physical conflict. A lesser director wouldn't help but to eke out a clear moral center amid this gray morality. Not Scott. He forces us to bask in this gray ambiguity with visceral brutality that makes choosing a side difficult, if not completely meaningless, in the best possible way. Much like Spencer, its failure at the box office is a crushing disappointment. I'll always have a soft spot for breezy and exciting tentpole films, but The Last Duel proved that the blockbuster adult drama still hasn't lost its luster. The Suicide Squad. Speaking of adult drama, shoot him in the... Stab him! Stab him! Yeah! I can see why writer-director James Gunn called this film the way it was. This isn't just a Suicide Squad film. It's not even called Suicide Squad. Oh no, it's The Suicide Squad. Super Suicide Squad 2 Turbo. That's more like it. It's as if it's the only Suicide Squad film that anybody should even watch, and to be honest, it deserves that recognition. This film is violent, gross, mean, offensive, ugly, tasteless, and batshit insane. Unlike the 2016 version, heyo! It's also such a colorful, whip-smart, and stylish film for making its transgressions all the more hilarious. I sat there laughing out loud and even in gleeful shock at some of the jokes and turns it takes. Deaths, murders, and flat-out insults among these characters don't even get a moment's thought for how cruel they get, and that makes them even more hilarious. There's a scene where Peacemaker and Bloodsport compete to see who can kill more people. With an offensively deadpan performance by John Cena as the former, I'm convinced that Gunn, who's already proven with Batista in Guardians of the Galaxy, is the go-to director for getting great performances out of athlete actors. Suicide Squad makes absolutely no pretensions of any dramatic depth, misunderstood softness, or any contrived redemptions. Gunn understands through and through that this is a quote-unquote superhero film about the bad guys, and they actually talk, fight, and act like bad guys. This isn't like Venom where he's a misunderstood edgelord or any of that camp bullshit in Let There Be Carnage. No, these guys kill, swear, and mock without any moral care in sight. By the same token, Gunn still remembers to make them interesting and engaging. Of course we want to see them make it through the mission, and the camaraderie that they nonetheless share amongst themselves makes for an endearing cast of villainous characters. There was a point in the climax when I actually felt scared that some of these characters may not make it. How the hell does Gunn even do this? These would be the kind of characters I totally get sick of, but I get so easily attached to them. In a world where most superhero films are either purely good or just slightly anti-heroic, or whatever the hell Venom was. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The Suicide Squad feels like a violent breath of fresh anarchy, even more so than the likes of Deadpool. I feel like if the DCEU really wants to further distinguish itself in the superhero market, then films like this, Joker, and Wonder Woman really should be the kind of films they make. Either superhero spins on familiar genres, or politically incorrect takes on comic book characters. Or maybe there's even a third possibility. Even with something that could have been better like Birds of Prey, it still feels like the kind of film that does give the DCEU a unique identity all its own. As for the Suicide Squad, the bar for the DCEU is set at its peak, and if more directors got cancelled for offensive tweets, then that would be the key to more great superhero films like these. CODA. Whenever I think about most of the other films on this list, I think about how all impeccably made they are. With this case for CODA, that's not the first thing I remember from watching it. The biggest takeaway from CODA was how it deeply touched me, and how a cover from both sides now can nearly move me to tears. The thing is with me and the originality factor of a film is that I don't mind predictability, unless it's supposed to surprise me. A film like Knives Out would totally suffer from predictability, thank God it didn't, because as a murder mystery, surprises, twists, and turns are some of its main attractions. A film like CODA, however, is a clean shot to my heart, one where a funny, honest, and heartfelt depiction of a predominantly deaf family, centered by a star-making performance by Emilia Jones, infuses a nostalgic coming-of-age formula with refreshing tenderness. Her family isn't comprised of mediocre Philistines, but disenfranchised workers demanding a stronger union. Her mentor isn't an angelic bastion for inspiration, but a blunt and affirmative human being who isn't afraid to call out her lack of focus. All of these characters echo the duality between what we expect these kinds of people to be versus who they really are. Writer-director Sean Heder makes her inspiring filmmaking debut with an honest depiction of the deaf community that also allows for its representation to naturally evolve into a story about communication, family, and finding your own voice. The supporting cast that includes Troy Kotsur, Eugenio Derbez, and Marlene Matlin all range from passionate to award-worthy. Given this is a coming-of-age story, it's clear where this will all lead. At the same time, Heder gives these two choices between going off to music school or staying home to help the family with equally dramatic and sympathetic conviction that it captures that adolescent moment of coming to an important crossroads with such sublime feeling that the emotional stakes alone makes for the perfect tension. Am I a sucker for coming-of-age films? No. I'm just a sucker for good coming-of-age films. There's a difference. West Side Story. 2021 really has been the year for musicals, hasn't it? When I first heard about this film being made, I wasn't all that enthused. I knew it would be at least good, but what else would there be to expect? The trailers didn't really sway me that much either. It's not so much that it didn't need to exist, we'll always have the original, but it's a matter of what else could possibly be added. And to top it all off, I feel like that the bulk of Steven Spielberg's most recent works ranges from okay to good, with some exceptions for better or for worse. Bear with me for a sec. This is far more than being a great film. It's the best that Spielberg has made since Saving Private Ryan in 1998, and it's such an amazing musical that it not only matches and surpasses the 1961 original, but it's directed with such an impeccable craftsmanship that it feels directed by someone with an accomplished mastery of musical cinema, made all the more astounding that it's directed by a guy who's never made one in his life until now, except for that opening to Temple of Doom. As much as I love the original, I will say that there were songs that I liked better than others. America, I Feel Pretty, and A Boy Like That were directed well, but not as good as they could have been. I always preferred Jet's song, G Officer Krupke, and Cool. A lot of that has to do with its brown-faced casting, so it did negatively impact the film for me. The remake is an entirely different story. Different West Side Story, I may add. The new one gets such an overhaul of a facelift that I felt like I was finally seeing the version of West Side Story that it was meant to be. The depiction of the sharks by actual Puerto Rican actors alone adds such fresh blood to these songs. America totally blooms from a tight musical scuffle to a sweeping and celebratory parade. Even songs I still enjoy like G Officer Krupke cranks the choreography up to 11 with sheer spectacle. I haven't even gotten to the acting of the film, but sweet buttery Jesus, I'm shocked that Rachel Zegler was snubbed for Best Actress Oscar. Really, Academy? Jessica Chastain? Come on. The way that Zegler can hold and sing a note and act as good as she can is utterly unfathomable, not just for someone her age, but for any other actor. Ariana DeBose totally lives up to the part of Anita while making it completely her own, Rita Moreno's as great as expected, and Mike Fast is nuts in the best possible way. His charisma and rage totally convinced me that a guy like him could easily lead a gang like the Jets. Also, J.K. Simmons instead? Really? Do you even know how to Academy anymore? I remember during the big fight and one of the characters got stabbed and I actually audibly gasped at some point. I never felt that in the original. This is probably Spielberg's best acted cast of actors because all of these performances are so outstanding that it made me forget how utterly outclassed and painfully average Ansel Elgort was. But that's a horse that's been beaten to death enough, so moving on. Where the original West Side Story felt like a stage musical put onto film, the remake remembered to put the film in musical film. Most of the remake's color palette is really dirty, grimy, and gritty, which is great for selling the urban decay of late 50s New York. When it does include colors like in America or The Dance at the Gym, it totally pops. On top of that, Spielberg once again shows how masterful he is with the camera with framing, lighting, and movement that geez, it's like the camera's dancing at the gym, it's so good. This is the power of the remake. It adds much needed weight in both the performances, the set design, cinematography, representation, and singing that it makes the story feel alive and new again. I can't wait for this to arrive on Disney Plus just so I can dive deeper into the filmmaking that reminded me what makes Spielberg the legendary director that he is. And what is it with great films bombing at the box office this year? I mean, what the hell is going on? And my number one favorite film of 2021 is Summer of Soul. Picture it like this. Imagine in 1969 during the Woodstock days when there was this brilliant music concert called the Harlem Cultural Festival, full of amazing artists like Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder, and Nina Simone, just to name a few, playing to a crowd of 50,000 people. Because the cops refused to secure the event, the Black Panther Party had to serve as security for this event, which never saw the light of day until now. The story behind what wasn't televised for well over 50 years, just let that sink in. 5 decades. Imagine all the history within that span. This isn't all empty hype. The story behind what wasn't televised, unraveled by first-time director Questlove, was perhaps the most musically euphoric experience I've ever had with a film, let alone a music documentary. This is what Summer of Soul has over the 14 other films on this list. It's an important love letter to both music and media as more than art, but as a cultural movement. The remastering of the 1969 footage looked so bright, so pristine, and so polished that I honestly felt like I was there and I forgot that I was watching footage that was both archived then remastered. From various interviews of attendees of the Harlem Cultural Festival, Summer of Soul provides endless amounts of lore and insight into this event, while still preserving the nostalgic magic of such a momentous concert. This is a magic that could neither be captured by the viewpoints of contemporary artists nor activists. It demands to be recaptured and reminisced by those who actually attended. Even as someone born in the mid-90s, I still empathized through their recollection of memories, the power, joy, and affirmation of such an event. Even after 50 years of languishing in archival oblivion, Summer of Soul still feels as timely as ever. With the prominence of Black Lives Matter, demands for police regulation penetrating mainstream discourse, the film serves as a rallying cry for Black solidarity, excellence, and reclaiming the identity after centuries of imperialism and industrialization. Even without taking the social context into consideration, Summer of Soul still recreates the concert experience to a T. The film unleashes a torrent of nostalgia and empowerment to those who attended the festival back in the day, while opening an exciting and educational window to those, such as myself, learning about and experiencing this for the very first time. This is what makes Summer of Soul the best film I've seen from 2021. It's a film that belongs to a new generation of audiences, reaffirms cultural liberation for those who experienced the Harlem Cultural Festival long ago, and bottles it all up into the feeling of a remastered concert that says more about the communal power of art than any other film in recent memory. Just see it. And that concludes my favorite films of 21. Favorite, best, to me it's all the same. These are the films that resonated with me the most, so of course I think they're the best. Whether your favorites of the year include an awards darling, one of the biggest hits at the box office, a smash hit on streaming, or even one that flew under the radar, cinema is all about the experiences we all share with ourselves or with other people. They're all as special as our experiences lend them, not what an award show, a list, or a group of people online or otherwise dictate. Once again, give this video a like, leave a comment down below of some of your favorite films from 2021, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you'll know when I upload my latest videos. While you look out for some of those videos coming soon, you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram at FilmGeekDave, as well as my letterbox for all the films I watch in my free time. Hey everybody, just a little update on the 52-week movie challenge. Instead of making the usual 10+ minute videos, I'm instead going to start making them into YouTube shorts, so expect my review of Dog Day Afternoon to fit that new format. With that said, the 10+ minute format will be for topics on films that interest me or even the occasional review. This should free up some space with more different ideas for videos I want to make rather than continue repeating something over and over again, whether it be about video game movies, the Academy Awards, or the like. That's all for today, and I'll see you next time.